Krishna pahi pahi jagan mohana Krishna paramananda Shri Krishna Devaki Vasudeva Nandana Krishna Divya Sundara Shri Krishna Devaki Vasudeva Nandana Krishna Divya Sundara Shri Krishna Nanda Yashoda Nanda Yashoda Nandana Krishna Induvadana Shri Krishna Pahi Pahi Jagan Mohana Krishna Paramananda Shri Krishna Krishna Krishna. Followed by this Swagata Bhashanam. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namamti Bhuyamsi. Vishwa Samskrita Manchasya Tamilnadu Pranta Pakshataha Ayojita Ganesmin Vidyamana Sarva Mahavidyalayanam Pakshatascha Karyakramesmin Adya Ye Atra Antarjala Madhyamena Samagataha Tesham Sarvesham Krite Asmakam Suswagatam Vyaharamaha. As this is a meeting where people from various parts of the world participate, I am switching to English language. At the outset, my prostration to God's Almighty, I feel extremely delighted and I deem it a great pleasure and feel very happy to welcome this august gathering. In the stream of Samskrita Saraswatam, a unique and a scholarly set of programs, which is the brainchild of Dr. S. Usha, Associate Professor of Sanskritam of Sita Lakshmi Ramaswamy College, Trichy. This is one of the collaborative programs titled Multilingualism and Sanskrit in Indian Knowledge Systems, and is planned to be organized by a set of Samskrita scholars who are the professors in the Department of Sanskritam from various colleges across Tamil Nadu and are members of Global Sanskrit Forum Tamil Nadu Pranta. On behalf of Global Sanskrit Forum Tamil Nadu Pranta, and we all the core members and coordinators wholeheartedly, with folded hands, welcome all the dignitaries and authorities of all the colleges who had grant permission and extended a great support in organizing such collaborative programs. And today, the collaborative program titled Multilingualism and Samskrita in Indian Knowledge Systems is being organized. We are extremely happy to welcome Professor Rajesh Kumar Mishra, Secretary of Global Sanskrit Forum, for being an impetus in organizing such programs with great enthusiasm successively. We, with folded hands, welcome the resource person of today, Dr. Naveen Bhatt, Associate Professor, School of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, Center for IKS, Chanakya University, Bengaluru, who joined us to explore on the title Multilingualism and Sanskritam in Indian Knowledge Systems with great enthusiasm and packed with so much of information. We all would love to listen to you, sir. We welcome all the professors, faculty friends from our college and other colleges, other members of GSF of Tamil Nadu Pranta and other Prantas, and all our dear students from various colleges, Samskrita language lovers across the country and globe, and each and everyone who have joined us virtually here today. Once again, with folded hands, we welcome you all. So, Swagatam. And followed by this, I request Dr. S. Usha, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Sanskrit of Sita Lakshmi Ramaswamy College, Trichy, to introduce our honorable chief guest of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lita. Namasarvebhyaha. तमिळ्नाडु प्रान्तिक वैश्व संस्कृत मंचद्वारा आयोजिते अस्मिन् अन्तर्जालीयगोष्ठ्यां भारतीय ज्ञानपरम्परायां बहुभाषिकता संस्कृतभाषा च इति विषये व्याख्या आयोजिता अस्ति इदानीं। भारतीयसंस्कृतेः मूलं भाषा एव, यत्र संस्कृतभाषा सर्वभाषाणां सङ्गमबिन्दुः सर्वविद्यायाः सेतुभूता च आसीत्, अस्ति भविष्यत्यपि च। एषा व्याख्यानशृङ्खला तस्यै परम्परायै समर्पिता अस्ति, यया भाषासंवादेन एव ज्ञानं विकसितं वितरितं च भविष्यति। अद्य अस्माकं परमसौभाग्यं यत् अस्य व्याख्यानस्य कर्ता डॉक्टर नवीनभट्टः चाणक्य विश्वविद्यालयस्य भारतीयज्ञानपरम्परा केन्द्रे सः अध्यापकः अस्मान् स्वविद्यया स्व अनुभवेन च प्रबोधयितुम् आगतः अस्ति। सः पाणिनीयव्याकरणपरम्परायां प्रसिद्धः आचार्यः, पाण्डुलिपिशास्त्रपारगः तथा लोकप्रियलेखकः अपि अस्ति। आवां तम् आदरपूर्वकं स्वागतं कुर्मः। स्वागतं डॉक्टर नवीनभट्ट महोदय। भवतः उपस्थित्या कार्यक्रमोऽयं शोभते। So, Dr. Naveen Bhatt is a distinguished scholar in the lineage of Paninian grammarians with profound expertise in textual criticism and manuscriptology. He earned his doctoral degree from the Central Sanskrit University, specializing in the field of Paninian grammar. With over a decade of dedicated academic engagement, he presently serves as the associate professor at the Center for Indian Knowledge Systems, Chanakya University, Bengaluru. Alongside his academic pursuits of teaching, research, and leading funded projects, Dr. Bhatt has made significant contributions to public intellectual discourse thought through his writings in Kannada newspapers, magazines, and periodicals. He is the author of 5 books in Kannada and 1 in English, among which his recent publication is Katha Ghata. This book presents a series of lucid narratives reflecting the depth and diversity of Indian history. A skilled translator and interpreter of thought across languages, Dr. Bhatt has translated works in Kannada, Sanskrit, and English, including a Kannada adaptation of Kuntabhatta's Vyakarana Bhushana Sara, a seminal work on Paninian semantics, published with the support of the government of Karnataka. His forthcoming Sanskrit book on social linguistics, to be published under the UGC, reflects his continuing engagement with the evolving intersections of language and culture. Dr. Bhatt has also published research papers and essays on Paninian linguistics, ancient Indian polity, and related humanities disciplines in reputed journals and edited volumes. His scholarship exemplifies a synthesis of traditional erudition and contemporary academic inquiry, contributing meaningfully to the study of Indian knowledge system. A wholehearted welcome to you, Dr. Naveen Bhatt. And now the session is over to you, and we are eagerly awaiting to listen to your scholarly discourse.
Pranamaha Samebhyaha. Kiranti Mangalasmeraiः Katakshaih Karunamritam Samaye Sannidhattanme Suktidhenu Saraswati. The August gathering today, perhaps I'll have to switch over to English only, not Sanskrit. That's what I understand, because the gathering is from various parts of the world. Though there are Sanskrit scholars and the domain experts of various knowledge streams of Sanskrit, still I'm compelled to speak perhaps today in English. So let me share my screen for further discussion. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. So, yeah, at the very outset, I should extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the organizers, because I never knew that there is a forum that regularly gathers here for various Shastric discourses. and I'm glad to know that this is happening. And today, this I think the August gathering here understands the significance of Sanskrit, but we are discussing it from the angle of Indian linguistics. I mean, linguistics plays very significant role. The study of languages and linguistic demography of any country plays a very significant role in designing policies of government and administration at various levels. Let me turn off my camera so that I can save bandwidth. Yeah. So Sanskrit and IKS. From that angle, if we can look into Sanskrit bhasha, evancha Bharatasya अन्याः भाषाः याः सन्ति, तासां सर्वासां भाषाणां दर्शनं यदि तया दृष्ट्या यदि अस्माभिः क्रियते तर्हि अत्यन्तम् उपकाराय कल्पते इति मनसि कृत्वा अधुना एतत् इयं प्रस्तुतिः क्रियते. Multilingualism and Sanskrit in Indic knowledge systems or Indian knowledge systems. So here we are exploring the intricate interplay of Sanskrit with regional languages in shaping India's intellectual mosaic. There is no doubt that all of us clearly understand that India is a mosaic in multiple terms. It is not only in linguistics, in our food habit, in our attire, in our thoughts, in our practices of daily life, and of course language. We diverse like anything. Perhaps this much of diversity, this much of color, these many colors, these many myriad angles and colors of cultures cannot be ever noticed in any part of the world in a single country. As we understand, there are countries which are formulated on the basis of language itself. Since two languages are different, the argument is there should be two countries, and we can here clearly understand, with very instances that are in front of us. In 1947, what happened, or in 1971, what happened, it's largely had to do with language and cultures. But here in India, even today, after these many years of invasion and cultural hegemonic implementations on Indians, still we live as a culture or a nation with multiple cultures. So with that background, we will just, without further ado, we will move into the core area of today's discussion. So four language families are actively present in India, that we are clearly aware of those. The major family, the languages under this particular family are spoken by larger portion of Indian population today. Somewhere around 78% of people in India across various states, they speak languages pertaining to this particular family, which is Indo-Aryan family or Indo-Iranian family or Indo-European family. And the second largest linguistic family that perhaps most of us gathered here, we belong to this particular family, that is Dravidian linguistic family. Somewhere around 20% of Indian people speak on a daily basis these languages. And remaining 2% are spoken by, 2% languages, only 2% of people speak remaining linguistic family languages, like Austro-Asiatic languages and Tibeto-Burman languages, or Sino-Tibetan languages. So this is overall linguistic map of India in terms of linguistic families. But if you look into the particulars, somewhere around 1,600 identified languages, including dialects and varieties of languages, somewhere around 1,600 languages are active in today's India. All these data is according to the previous census that was conducted in 2011. After 2011, another census supposed to happen was 2020 and 2021, but due to COVID, it did not happen. So now we are due for another survey of multiple ideas, not necessarily only language. Okay, according to that previous census, 121 mother tongues are identified. In fact, Indian people gave the data somewhere around 19,300 languages as their mother tongues. The collected raw data showed there are 19,000 plus languages spoken in India. In reality, somewhere around 6,000 languages are there across various parts of the world for humanity today. So whereas Indian people identified 19,000 plus languages, because everybody who speak any variant of language would have a name for it, and would mention it as his or her mother tongue. So that is a very raw data. Later it was rationalized, and experts, they found out there are 121 mother tongues are functional. I mean, the languages which have got more than 10,000 speakers, those are called as languages, I mean active languages in India. And out of that, some 22 languages are known to be scheduled languages. Each schedule of Indian constitution houses these languages. I mean, they are mentioned over there, and most of the known languages of India, they belong to this category. And on Indian currency note also we can identify these languages. And 11 languages are identified as classical languages. And this list, I mean, for scheduled languages, for classical languages, the queue is still growing. I mean, every linguistic community is putting pressure on government agencies to identify their language as classical language, or scheduled language. So, in large, we can understand India is the land of multiplicity, and on top of that, we are the land of linguistic multiplicity. That is very unique feature of Bharatavarsha. And also, perhaps great number of polyglots. I mean, people who can speak more than one language can be found in India. Um, if you take the South Indian states like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, at least 40% of people can speak more than one language. People who are living in the borders of these states, of course, it is understandable that they know two languages. But then people who are living in the cores of the states also know more than one language. Indian language, I'm saying, not necessarily one Indian language and one non-Indian language. That is very much possible because English has been brought as one of the official languages of government communication and education, mainstream education also. We find English as one of the prominent languages. So that is understandable. But apart from that, people here, common people who are not university taught student people, who are not university educated people, even they know more than one Indian languages. That makes this idea that India is the land of polyglots. So this is largely about the scenario. Currently, if you look into the Indian map, this is what linguistic color coding we can see across various states. But then today's discussion is not only around Indian languages. There is an extra emphasis on Sanskrit. As I understand, this group is largely of Sanskrit scholars who have studied Sanskrit or studying Sanskrit and teaching Sanskrit, or have taught Sanskrit here before. So Sanskrit for Indian knowledge system, even today when discussion on IKS starts, or when it started a couple of years ago, maybe in 2020, all these discussions came into being because in 2020, right after COVID, when the first lockdown was released, there was an effort at the central government level, to create a wing for Indian knowledge systems. And initially, it became part of AICTE, but later it was extended to Ministry of Education, if I'm not wrong. So when this discussion came into mainstream academia in India, many people, especially people who are of the Sanskrit background, were thinking uh, there will be extra emphasis on Sanskrit itself. But the scenario is a bit different. Of course, Sanskrit occupies major map of Indian knowledge systems. But then it is not only about Sanskrit. Sanskrit, of course, played a key role, and it is playing key role. But then ignoring other languages will isolate this very idea of IKS from others. If that should not happen, then we should also include the discussions of other languages. We should identify the contributions of other than Sanskrit languages to the domain called IKS. So, if you look into the evolution, how did it all happen? Along, it is not that we do not subscribe. Then in the academia, we do not subscribe to the idea that earlier only one single language was there, that was Sanskrit, and later from that language, every other language formulated in India. This kind of argumentation, of course, it is very fantastic, but then you cannot substantiate it academically. So we may not subscribe to that very idea. Languages, they evolved parallelly, and there was always exchange of words, ideas, and phrases, and a very texture of language among languages. But then it is not that one language was mother language, all other languages are sister languages or daughter languages. That cannot be established. Okay, then there is, if you look into Sanskrit, largely we come across two types of Sanskrit. Largely I'm speaking. There are multiple types of Sanskrit can be classified. Shastric Sanskrit is different. Colloquial Sanskrit or conversational Sanskrit is different. अत्र बहवो हि संस्कृतं जानन्ति अस्माकं प्रतिदिनं यदा व्यवहारः क्रियते अस्माभिः तदानीम् उपयुज्यमाना संस्कृतभाषा भिन्ना एव भवति या हि संस्कृतभाषा ग्रन्थेषु नोपलभ्यते अथवा ग्रन्थस्था या भाषा तया भाषया अस्माभिः नित्यव्यवहारः न क्रियते अतः एषु दिवसेषु संस्कृतस्य नाना प्रविभागाः कर्तुं शक्याः अथापि प्रायेण तत्र विभागद्वयं कल्पयितुं शक्यम्. One is that is Vedic Sanskrit and classical Sanskrit. So Vedic Sanskrit, I have come across some linguistic groups who are not ready to even recognize Sanskrit as recognize Vedic language as Sanskrit language. They bring in the argument saying that Panini or Patanjali, they did not say they are doing this grammar for Sanskrit. They did not mention. In the entire Ashtadhyayi, there is no mention of Sanskrit in the context of language. Sanskritam Shabda is there in Ashtadhyayi, but not in the sense or not as a name of the language. Similarly, in Mahabhashya also of Patanjali, we do not come across this very work of Ashtadhyayi, work of Panini is done on a language called Sanskrit. So on these basis, they say the language of Vedas is not Sanskrit at all. But this argument, of course, it can be nullified with enough proofs and evidences. However, just giving you the idea how different linguistic groups in various states of India are operative in the current academia. Okay, so Vedic Sanskrit is there, the kind of Sanskrita that is used in Vedas, and then Laukika Sanskrita is also there. That is conversational Sanskrit. It is the textual Sanskrit which can be noticed in Shastra Granthas and Kavyas and Puranas. So, be it Vedic Sanskrita or Laukika Sanskrita, there is one grammar that links these two Sanskritas, and they speak of both the varieties of Sanskrita, that is Ashtadhyayi of Panini. There are other grammatical schools prior to Panini. Panini himself mentions many grammarians in his Ashtadhyayi. However, those grammatical schools or traditions are not completely alive today. We can identify some sutras of certain grammars. For example, Aindra Vyakarana, 1 or 2 sutras are available, or Chandra Vyakarana, some references are available. But incomplete, those previous Vyakaranas, Granthas are not available. But Paninian grammar is completely available. Not only available, n number of commentaries which have been done in the tradition are also available. Moreover, the very tradition is alive today. Even today, works are happening. Even today, the teachers, Guru and Shishya Parampara is very much alive. Post-Paninian grammars also are there. Of course, most of those works are available today. Post-Paninian grammars are available. Their texts are available. However, as a tradition, most of them are not that functional. So then why this significance is given only to Paninian Sanskrit or Paninian Ashtadhyayi or grammar? The question to be answered in this manner, that Paninian grammar deals with both Vedika Samskrita and Laukika Samskrita. And Vedas, one of the prominent angas or the components of Vedas or subordinate part of Vedas is Vyakarana. Shiksha, Vyakaranam, Chando, Niruktam, Jyotisham, Tatha, Kalpascheti, Shadangani. There are 6 limbs of Vedas. Out of those 6, fully half, that is 50% of these 6 limbs, are dealing with one or the other areas of language itself. For example, Vyakarana, then phonetics, that is Shiksha, and etymology, Nirukta. These are directly dealing with language itself. So, Sanskrit, I mean, when you say grammar, it is Samskrita grammar. When you say Shiksha, it is Samskrita Shiksha. When you say Nirukta, it is Samskrita Nirukta. When you speak of these areas of language, it is largely of Samskrita only. But what about other languages and other traditions, grammatical traditions? Of course, they emerged, but many hundreds of years later. So other grammatical traditions, as I mentioned, Katantra Vyakarana is there, Jaina Vyakarana is there, Mugdhabodha Vyakarana is there, Harinamamrita Vyakarana is there. Various types of Vyakaranas are there, but as a tradition, even today, Paninian grammar holds good. I mean, it is still alive. So when it comes to classical Sanskrit, along with classical Sanskrit grammatical traditions, other languages of India also they formulated their languages in the light of Paninian grammar. No linguist would perhaps say Indic languages were not under the impression of Sanskrit. One has to accept it because the ancient most available grammar today is of Sanskrita, and the first ever grammars of various languages are under the impression of Ashtadhyayi of Panini. There is no a speck of doubt about these things. Modern languages or modern grammar works of modern languages or other languages of India, they they do not follow Panini, or they do not even want to take inputs from Panini grammar. That is a different story. But however, when for the first time Indic languages thought of grammar, they were all under the impression of Paninian grammar. So it is so when I said it came as Vedanga, grammar came as Vedanga, but then it was the contribution was made by those who may not subscribe to Vedas, or who do not clearly subscribe to Vedas or accept Vedas as authoritative texts. For example, Jainas and Buddhas, they too have greatly contributed to grammar itself. There is Jaina Vyakarana, or then Buddhist scholars in the Prakriya Prapancha, I mean the Prakriya part of Paninian grammar today, even today, largely it takes inputs from some Buddhist scholars. So there was no such barricade of which stopped people of other than Vedic schools working on Paninian grammar, though Paninian grammar served as Vedanta. So development of grammatical traditions in other languages also can be seen. First ever such language to formulate its own grammar is Tamil. There is no doubt about it. So if you look into the table here on screen, Sanskrit, first ever language, Panini Ashtadhyayi, 5th century to 4th century BCE. That is 2500 to 600 years ago from now. And then Tolkappiyam comes of Sanskrit language by Tolkappiyar. This is 2nd century BCE or 5th century Common Era. There is a long debate on the times of Tolkappiyam Vyakaranam. There is a set of people who argue Tolkappiyam is much older than Panini also, but evidences do not support those arguments. However, of 2nd century before Common Era or 5th century I mean between 2nd century Common Era to 5th century Common 2nd century before Common Era to 5th century before Common Era, Tolkappiyam can be located. The next language in the southern part of Bharat to get its own Vyakarana is Kannada. It is in 10th century Common Era. It is 1000 years ago from now. And then comes Telugu, Nannaya's um, Andhra Shabda Chintamani. There is one Karnataka Shabda Chintamani also. For for our understanding, we should look into these non-Sanskrit language, non-Sanskrit grammars. But some of these are composed in Sanskrit. There is one Karnataka Bhasha Bhushana, one Vyakarana of Kannada language, and it is written for Kannada language in Samskrita. Also, Shabdamani Darpana of Keshi Raja, it is entailed by a Dhatu Patha. Keshi Raja Shabdamani Darpana is written in Kannada for Kannada. There is no doubt about it. But then the Dhatu Patha, which is the part of that grammar, the meaning of the dhatus, meaning of Kannada dhatus are given in Sanskrit. Similarly, Telugu also had its grammar in 11th century to 13th century Common Era, very recent times in the timeline of Indian history, if you look into. So Sanskrit influence was very much evident. Malayalam got its language, its grammar in 14th century. Similarly, Odia in 16th century, Marathi in 17th century. Marathi getting its own language in its own grammar in 17th century has a reason for it, because the Mughal invasion, the heat of the Mughal invasion was largely experienced among South Indian languages that was on Marathi. North Indian languages, of course, North Indian entire terrain, the practices of northern part of India, the temples of northern part of India, they were raised down. I mean, they were mixed with the mitti. I mean, mitti ke saath mila dena, aisa bolte hain na. It was completely dilapidated. The impression of that, or the impact of such attacks, largely was experienced by Marathas, and effortfully they reversed it. You can see actually constantly from 17th century to 19th century and 20th century how effortfully they have reversed this Persian impression on Marathi. Marathi is such a language which is neither completely Dravidian nor completely Indo-Aryan. However, I mean both the chaya, both the impressions can be seen on Marathi. But during this Mughal era, they came under tremendous pressure of Persian linguistic impression. So you may notice you may notice the work called Rajya Vivahara Kosha, and then up till Savarkar, extensive work has been taken up by Marathi people to re-Sanskritize, I mean, de-Persianize their language, Marathi. So they very recently got their language, that is, sorry, their grammar, 17th century. Later in Gujarati also it got somewhere around 16th to 17th century Common Era. Bengali, 18th century, they got their first ever grammar work. Bengalis used to study Katantra Vyakarana a lot. Though Katantra Vyakarana originated from Andhra Pradesh, according to one of the anecdotes, it became so famous in Bengal, in Vanga Desha. So this is largely how Sanskrit language and Sanskrit grammar influenced the grammatical traditions of other parts of India. So then, classical period Sanskrit raised its preferred Sanskrit's rise as the preferred medium for scholarly works and literature, thanks to its precision and systematic approach. As today, what English is enjoying, one of the most prominent languages of the tech world and international communication, similar stature was enjoyed by Sanskrit once upon a time in India. It was not that any particular state ever spoke Sanskrit as their mother tongue. We do not have any evidences for that. But most of the knowledge production, knowledge, codifying was done in Sanskrit. If an author of South India, or if an author of East India, or if an author of the greater India like Takshashila or Pataliputra or Nepala, all these authors, if they want to be recognized by the people of other parts of India, the only option they had was to write in Sanskrit. They had their own mother tongue was there. I mean, everything was in place. But then for communication, I mean, for academic communication or for intellectual communication, Sanskrit was the route. So in medieval period, scenario changed. Sanskrit's interaction with the local dialects led to formation of new regional languages, what we call as apabhramshas, maybe Awadhi, Maharashtri Prakrit, all these languages. All these they branched out from their mother tongues. So enriching India's linguistic landscape. But also another shape is Sanskrit and Indic semantic world, how they are intertwined. When this kind of mingling of languages happened, our semantic world did not get disturbed. For example, imagine a South Indian person who speaks one of the Dravidian languages. When he met with a North Indian person who speaks maybe Awadhi or Marathi or something else, these two people conversed with similar linguistic, similar semantic world. As Bhartrhari in his Vakyapadya clearly puts up, see, we convert the world of materials, or the world outside, the objective world, into linguistic world through words. So, and sorry, it is not even linguistic world, it is a semantic world, Artha Jagat. So this formation of Artha Jagat for an Indian happens through mother tongue, and that mother tongue is not in any difference, or not in any rift, not in any skirmish with Sanskrit. So Sanskrit plays a very significant role, a key role, in formulating the semantic world of an Indian kid. I'll give you one example, perhaps that will make more clear. These thoughts will get clear. For example, I have to speak of Devatas. I have to speak of Paraloka, Janma, Mrityu, Samsara, Bandha, Moksha, Paramatma, Atma, Jivatma. यदि इमे विचाराः इमे विचाराः भारतीय जनैः अवगम्येरन् तर्हि अस्माभिः संस्कृतानि पदान्येव उपयुज्यन्ते। संस्कृतैः पदैः एव एतेषां व्यवहारः सर्वासु भाषासु अन्यासु भवति। So the moment you say Atman, there is no linguistic community person or linguistic community member who does not understand ये क्या है, right? Why? Because in formulating the semantic world, Sanskrit was used. When that person was a kid, he got to know these concepts through Samskrita terms. So when those Sanskrit terms are used in local language, he is not in confusion. The confusion occurs when he tries to assimilate this idea with the Western concept, right? That is what is currently happening, or it has been happening for last 70 plus years, or perhaps when the idea of translation started in India. We discussed so far, n number of languages are there in India, but still we do not come across any instance of translation up till medieval times. Only in medieval times we hear of translation, the very idea of translation. First ever translation efforts in India started during medieval period, especially Mughal period. There was this Aurangzeb's brother Dara Shukho, who studied Sanskrit, studied Upanishads, studied Bhagavad Gita, and he took up the mission. I mean, it is at a massive scale. It was not that one person sitting and translating. He took it as a mission at a larger scale, and translated a lot of Indic texts into Persian language. That was first ever instance of translation as such in India. You may ask me, Chinese languages, they also translated Indic texts. That is true. Second century or third century Common Era onwards itself, we can assume that there were translations of Buddhist texts into Chinese languages, but then that did not happen in India. That happened outside India. The history of Indian translation goes back to medieval time. And later, when Europeans arrived at Indian soil and when they took over India's control in 1870s, if I'm not wrong, yeah, 1780s. 1780s, first ever English translation of Bhagavad Gita took place. One of the scholars, Wilkins, if I'm not wrong, he studied Sanskrit and translated Bhagavad Gita for the first time into English. That is the first ever translation happened from Sanskrit to English. And later there was a big mission to largely translate at the grand scale, to translate Indic text and Indic ideas into European language, that is English. That mission, I mean, most of us have heard of that mission called Asiatic Society. For next 100 years or 150 years, what happened is constant translation of Indian ideas and comparing them with Western concepts. And that has left its impression even today on Indic psyche. So the moment we are asked to translate Devata, we will say simply God. The moment we are asked to translate dharma, we may muddle into the translation called religion. We may muddle into the translation papa punya, maybe as sin and virtue. This translation is a newfound innovation on India, which is post medieval era, medieval time development, and that has caused a lot of damage to the semantic world that Indians ever built. So today our semantic world is contaminated. Contaminated. I'll take this up a bit further, because this contamination, if it has to be repaired, then Sanskrit is the way. That is where the key role of Samskrita comes in the IKS. Okay, then modern era, we have study of Indian linguistics. There are many institutions who are working on Indian languages. CIIL is there, CSTT is there, and language departments of various universities, and dedicated universities are there for languages. Kannada University is there, Tamil University is there, Sanskrit universities are there. Perhaps biggest number of universities are there for Sanskrit only. Though it is not language of any particular state and people, still we have given enough emphasis in terms of funds allocation to Sanskrit. Whether it is effectively being used, that is a question that we have to answer to ourselves. But however, fund allocation as such is happening to Sanskrit. So then computational linguistics, in the domain of computational linguistics, Sanskrit has found its own way. It has established its significance over there. And then nowadays, our students or the modern scholarship largely reliant upon large language modules or LLMs or language models like ChatGPT. In this also, further research yet to take place how Sanskrit can be a great contribution. And then Indian context, if you look into, Sanskrit is serving as cultural language of our land. So in the past, this is known to us Sanskrit as the preferred medium for shastras. Any shastra anybody wants to write, he has to try or she has to try it in Sanskrit. Was it happening in South India also? I must say yes. There are good number of evidences that we can bring in. For example, most of us are aware how language politics has played its own role in post independence scenario in India. It has sometimes taken very bad shape. It has hammered it. I mean, it has hit Sanskrit language very badly. Uh, but if you culturally look into where currently language politics are going on, which states are against Sanskrit, or I mean, when I say states, not people, the state's administration or state's political ideology who are against Sanskrit, once upon a time they were fertile lands of Sanskrit works itself. You take Karnataka or you take Andhra or you take in Tamil Nadu or Kerala, Sanskrit flourished like anything. If you look into the work of Mahendra Verma of 7th century Common Era, who was one of the prominent kings of Pallava dynasty, beautiful Sanskrit plays he has written. Even today, those are readable. Those are available. The later Jain works of the Tamil also had great influence of Sanskrit. For example, maybe Silapadikaram or Manimegalai. The Manimegalai, the very term Mani and Mekhala are coming from Sanskrit. Silapadikaram, the Adhikaram term is also coming from Sanskrit. Why that? These works are post 10th century works. But Tolkappiyam, the first ever Tamil grammar, had taken this very term called Kavyam from Sanskrit. So there was no such rift among Indic languages, but post-independence India has seen a lot of political skirmish in the name of language. And then, I mean, these languages, both Sanskrit, Prakrit, Paishachi, Ardhamagadi, Magadhi, Maharashtri, name the language, and Sanskrit, they lived a very coexisting life, or one language was compatible with the other language, and it was not in contest with other language. There was no rift between them. So across languages, ideas used to move. One example you look into, the story of Ramayana. If you look into the story of Ramayana, basically you may say Valmiki Ramayana is the source work of Ramayana. But then, if it is not told in local languages, how people came to know of that story? There is a very prominent argument that Sanskrit was never the language of common public. For a moment, we will accept it was not the language of common public, or Sanskrit language was not given to common public. Let us take it for the sake of argument. Then, how did the story of Ramayana percolate into other languages? And as I mentioned, there was no translation as such. There was no idea of translation up till very recent times. For example, when first ever version of Ramayana in Tamil came in 12th century, 11th century or 12th century in the name of Kambar Ramayana, a lot of modifications were done. A lot of ideas are taken from Valmiki Ramayana. Those are incorporated. And ultimately, a new work emerged as Kambar Ramayana. A lot of anomalies can be noticed. Then how it was possible? It was all possible because we have to accept there was no rift among languages. So if a speaker of Karnataka, has no any barrier in conversing or understanding in Sanskrit, and scholarship of those times, ever it was packed with Samskrita itself, and it was the scenario up till very recent times. If I look into the classical works of Kannada, classical works means not of 8th century, 10th century, 11th, 14th, 15th, 17th century. I am speaking of 19th century works. So the best classical works of Kannada, the authors had great reach to Sanskrit literature and language. And thus they could create best of the Kannada works. That was the scenario up till very recent times, but current scenario is taking a different shape. It is not necessarily, any hatred towards Sanskrit. I'm not saying that. That may be there in a very small pockets of Indic linguistic map, but then largely one sort of degeneration of understanding of Indian languages is happening. It is not that people do not study Sanskrit properly. It is actually that people do not study any Indian language properly. Most of us are academicians here. If you walk into a classroom, we can easily notice, out of imagine there are 60 students, at least 10 students would raise their hands when you ask this question. How many of you cannot read, write, and understand your mother tongue? At least 10 hands will get raised. Either they they cannot read their mother tongue, or they cannot write in their mother tongue. They can only converse in mother tongue. This kind of haphazard situation of linguistic map of India is emerging nowadays. It is emerging while we are speaking about large language models, or human languages are getting eroded. So the ideas were fluidly moving across. That was the point in the last slide. Quickly, I will conclude within next 5-10 minutes. So in the literature, it played a very extensive role, because most of the Indic philosophical understanding of India is codified in Sanskrit. If you ask me if it is not done in other languages, yes, it is done in other languages. There is no doubt about it. But then, whenever they wanted one concept to be explained, they would rely upon Samskrita back. It may be in Tamil, Nalayara Divya Prabandhangal, or the very term Nalayara Divya Prabandhangal. Divya Prabandha is a Sanskrit term. So whenever there is, as I mentioned earlier, the Indic semantic world, the formation of Indic semantic world ever happened through Samskrita. So if not for Samskrita, other languages of India cannot effectively present that or represent that to the further generations. And then scientific texts and treatises were also composed in. When I say scientific, we have texts on medicine, we have texts on metallurgy, we have texts on Rasayana Shastra, we have texts on mathematics. All these works were largely done in Samskrita. Of course, if you look into 14th century, post 14th century works, there are mathematics works done in other languages as well. But as I mentioned earlier, the formation of Indic semantic world happened through Samskrita. So whenever such concepts to be elaborated, they would again go back to Samskrita. And then aesthetic contributions in arts also in that arena also Sanskrit played very key role. And then legal texts and frameworks, what we call today as the Bharatiya Arthashastra tradition. It is not single text, but Bharatiya Arthashastra tradition, wherein the texts pertaining to Dharmashastra, texts pertaining to Arthashastra, administration, economy, all these are incorporated. It is largely done in Samskrita. Then integration with polity and governance, as I mentioned earlier. In 17th century, Marathas, they created their own work, reversing the impression of Persian language on Marathi, and they did that work in Sanskrita. So with that, we come to the final part. What happens? I mean, if you look into the IKS, Indian knowledge systems, and these many languages, and Sanskrit being one of the prominent languages of this whole family of Indian languages, what actually it is doing for Indians? It is doing a great job of enhancing cognitive flexibility and ability of Indian psyche. The studies clearly show more the languages you know, more capable your brain is in absorbing other thoughts. And EP 2020 clearly speaks of education in mother tongue. And as far as Indian knowledge systems is concerned, if only our languages survive, Indian knowledge system survives. With whatever effort, with whatever vocabulary, with whatever publication you do in non-Indian language, Indic knowledge system will not serve its pure purpose, that is Atmodhara, unless it is done in Sanskrit. If really somebody wants to know the core of Indian knowledge systems, Sanskrit is inevitable. When I say Sanskrit is inevitable, I'm actually saying Indian languages are inevitable. If only Indian languages survive, then the Indic knowledge system survives for its actual purpose. Otherwise, it will become an autopsy done to a dead body. I mean, that's what Westerns did for 100 years when they established Asiatic society. They studied Indian culture and Indian treatises as though they are studying a dead body. They had no connection, no emotional attachment, nothing. If that has to be done by Indians, that is a saddest affair, state of affairs. We should not be doing that. So I guess largely should be done in, Indian languages, and it is disseminated in any language possible. I mean, doing something in a domain and disseminating the ideas of domain, these are two different things. And studying sociology, studying philosophy is one thing. Making sociology, making philosophy is a different thing. So to do philosophy, to do Indic knowledge system exercises, we need Indic languages. And Indic languages are nourished by Sanskrit. There is no doubt about it. So then community traditions, these are another major feature of Indian languages. Indian culture and Indian knowledge systems. If not for these cultural colors, what do we have? How do we identify? How do we quantify? How do we understand India as a composite of multiple cultures? And for promotion and promotion of this cultural traditions, which happened in both Marga and Desi. In Marga, it happened through original work, commentaries, टीका टोकम अपेक्षते इत्यपि श्रूयते. नाम भाष्यम, टीका, commentaries, additional commentaries, footnotes, this kind of tradition evolved. But Desi, it did not happen in that manner. But both these ultimately are contributing, and for that, Sanskrit is one of the significant keys. Okay, then wide circulation of knowledge, as I mentioned earlier, for creation of knowledge, we should be reliant upon Indian knowledge, Indian languages, and dissemination of knowledge can happen through any language that we are comfortable with. So I will not go into it. It's already time. So in relevance only, we will see very quickly relevance of multilingualism in NEP 2020. I just touched this point here before that it emphasizes, NEP 2020 emphasizes education, early education, especially in Indian language in mother tongues. I mean, the mother tongues of India, the languages which are identified. 121 languages are identified, as I mentioned earlier. So the NEP 2020 emphasizes the importance of multilingual education, recognizing the value of mother tongue instruction and the integration of classical languages like Sanskrit. This approach aims to enhance interdisciplinary research, promote cognitive flexibility, this already we have discussed, and provide students with direct access to primary source and experience. It is not only primary text that we are speaking of, but the primary experience. An Indian kid can experience India only through Indian languages, not through English. It cannot happen. Why it cannot happen? It is not any shortcoming of English, but it is just cultural difference. These two languages were meant for different cultural conversations. So you cannot communicate Indic ideas through English, and you cannot communicate perhaps the Western ideas through Indic languages. These differences cannot be mitigated or lessened by mere translation. So for a kid, if he has to or she has to experience India the way the way we live, then Indic language is essential. So enriching their understanding of India's diverse knowledge systems. So this is what NEP says. There is no dedicated place for Sanskrit in NEP 2020. When it got released, every Sanskrit scholar was under a shock that there is no dedicated place for Sanskrit. But of course, there is emphasis on Indian languages, and for Indian languages to survive, the survival of Sanskrit is very essential. In that way, we can understand NEP 2020 is giving space for Sanskrit too. So today, the multilingual model in education remains crucial as it fosters cognitive flexibility and facilitates the integration of regional languages with Sanskrit, and promotes a deeper understanding of India's rich intellectual heritage. This is what IKS is. By embracing mother tongue education alongside Sanskrit, learners gain direct access to ancient texts, enhancing interdisciplinary research and engagement with civilizational knowledge system. So this is the future. This is the overall idea of multilingualism and Sanskrit in the light of Indian knowledge systems. So with that, I conclude my presentation here. The forum is open for any discussion or questions if there are any.
Outstanding, Dr. Naveen Bhatt. We are extremely delighted to hear you. A downpour of information. Excellent discourse.